Has always been an empire. It's been around longer than any of the other players in the modern Middle East right now, and they are not going anywhere. If we get deeply involved and deeply entangled with Iran, we are playing right into China's hands, because China would like nothing more than for us to be committing our military industrial base to a war in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and then to be committing our conventional military power, our blood and our treasure, back in the Middle East. That will make the Pacific, our actual border, extremely vulnerable.
That's not a critic watching from the sidelines. That's Joe Kent, then the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, describing what he believed America was about to do to itself. Kent didn't just disagree with the war in Iran, he resigned over it. And once you listen closely to why, this stops sounding like a policy disagreement and starts sounding like a warning about intelligence, about truth, and about how a country can drift into conflict without clearly saying what it is fighting for. This is Synthesize, where we turn long podcast conversations into their most important ideas. The first thing Kent does is widen the frame. He refuses to treat Iran as an isolated crisis. In his telling, the danger is not just what happens in the Middle East. It's what happens when America gets pulled into another long conflict while already stretched elsewhere.
It's always been an empire. It's been around longer than any of the other players in the modern Middle East right now, and they are not going anywhere. If we get deeply involved and deeply entangled with Iran, we are playing right into China's hands, because China would like nothing more than for us to be committing our military industrial base to a war in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and then to be committing our conventional military power, our blood and our treasure, back in the Middle East. That will make the Pacific, our actual border, extremely vulnerable.
That's what makes the opening so strong. He's not saying Iran is the biggest threat on the board. He's saying Iran could become the mechanism that weakens America globally. Great powers rarely collapse because of one enemy. They weaken by overcommitting, by burning attention, money, weapons, and political energy in too many places at once. Then the conversation shifts into something deeper than strategy. Before you can talk about war honestly, you have to talk about truth honestly. And that's where the interview becomes less about government process and more about national character.
As all of us have experienced in our lying. And so the only way out of this is to stop lying, is to tell the truth now, probably 63 years after we should have started telling the truth, but it's never too late to tell the truth now about everything. Because it's never as painful as you think it will be. It's actually an act of liberation. In fact, it's the only real act of liberation. Telling the truth sets you free because the truth itself sets you free. That is always and everywhere a...
This matters because war is rarely sold through complexity. It's sold through moral simplification. A threat becomes cleaner than it is. Motives become nobler than they are. Uncertainty disappears. Kent's argument is that once truth is bent at the beginning, every decision that follows gets built on unstable ground. And eventually the lie becomes more important to defend than the country itself. Lots of people criticize Washington. Very few walk away from power while doing it. Kent's resignation is what makes this conversation different. It turns his argument from commentary into consequence.
If you would speak for yourself and flesh out some of these points. I'm just going to read the first one. I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. How did you reach that conclusion?
I think this is key. I mean, this would be more challenging to explain had the Secretary of State, the President, and the Speaker of the House not come out and said that we conducted this attack at this time because the Israelis were about to do so. So that takes away the argument that there was an imminent threat, as in Iran was planning to attack us.
This is the hinge point. The phrase imminent threat is not a minor detail. It's the phrase that makes military action sound necessary instead of chosen. Kent is arguing that the administration's own public explanation undermined that claim. And if that claim weakens, then the entire moral architecture of the war starts to weaken with it. Then comes one of the most important reversals in the whole interview. The issue, Kent says, is not whether Iran could retaliate. Of course it could. The issue is what sequence of events was actually being described.
And it's not offhand. He reasons it out. He explains there's a logic chain there, and he says, we knew not that Iran was going to attack. He did not say that.
Right.
He said we knew that Israel was going to attack Iran, and in retaliation for those attacks by Israel against Iran, Iran might attack American forces. So the imminent threat that the Secretary of State is describing is not from Iran, it's from Israel.
Exactly. And I think this speaks to the broader issue. Who is in charge of our policy in the Middle East? Who's in charge of when we decide to go to war or not? In this case, with what the Secretary described and later on the President.
That distinction changes everything, because now the story is no longer, we stopped an attack. It becomes, we anticipated the consequences of an escalation that was already about to happen. In other words, the threat may not have been independent, it may have been conditional. And that difference is the difference between defense and entanglement. At this point, Kent does something smart. He blocks the easiest attack on his position before it can land. He makes clear that this is not a pacifist argument and not a naive argument. It's an argument about how force should be justified.
With Iran, you're saying what to that? What's your response?
Well, I have no compunction about really fighting anybody who threatens our country, and the Iranians have posed a threat in the past, and the Iranians have a way of threatening America. They have the capability, and we always talk in the intelligence circles about capability and intent, what your enemy is capable of doing and what they actually want to do. And again, back to the data that we have on the Iranians, they used the escalation ladder. We saw that deliberately during the 12-day war. When they struck back after Midnight Hammer, it was very deliberate. They fired an equal amount of missiles as we dropped bombs.
Capability and intent. That may sound technical, but it's actually one of the most human distinctions in the entire interview. Someone can have the power to hurt you without actively trying to hurt you now. In strategy, confusing those two things is disastrous, because once capability alone becomes enough, almost any adversary can be turned into an urgent justification for war. Midway through the interview, the conversation reaches the phrase that usually shuts down debate: nuclear weapon. It's the kind of phrase that compresses public attention into pure fear. And that's exactly why Kent's answer matters so much.
Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. They can't have a nuke. Whenever asked, we say, let's just start here. They can't have a nuke. Okay, got it. Everyone agreed with that conceptually. Was Iran on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon?
No, they weren't, 3 weeks ago when this started, and they weren't in June either. I mean, the Iranians have had a religious ruling, a fatwa, against actually developing a nuclear weapon since 2004. That's been in place since 2004. That's available in the public sphere. But then also we had no intelligence to indicate that fatwa was being disobeyed or it was.
This is the tonal break in the story. Because once the nuclear case softens, the emotional engine driving support for escalation softens too. Kent isn't saying Iran is harmless. He's saying the strongest available justification, the one designed to end argument instantly, was not supported in the way the public was led to assume. Now the conversation gets brutally clear. No rhetoric, no abstraction, just a direct challenge. What did the intelligence actually show when it came to an imminent threat?
Because it's obviously illegitimate. So imminent threat, you're saying that there was no intelligence that you saw with the highest level clearance, obviously involved in this conversation, that showed an imminent threat from Iran to the United States?
No, unless we took certain actions, unless we came after them in a way that they thought threatened the regime. Then we basically knew what they were going to do.
Well, okay,
what
but
they're doing.
Right, of course.
Right, but like any country. So if you attack any country, we know that they're going to have a reaction.
We face an imminent threat once we attack you.
Fantastic. Yeah, exactly. But there was no intelligence that said, hey, on whatever day.
This may be the core thesis of the entire documentary. The threat becomes imminent in the scenario where escalation happens first. That doesn't make the danger imaginary. It changes the order of causation. And in war, sequence matters. Because one of the first questions any serious society should ask is not just what happened, but what made it happen next. By the end of the conversation, the focus expands again. This is no longer just about intelligence or timing. It becomes a question of alignment. When two countries move together, are they actually moving toward the same end?
Whatsoever, other than there's no plan. The Israelis don't have a plan because they don't care. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's completely fair. I think as Americans, rightfully, we want a clear stated objective and end state for war. I think that's something that was born out of the GWOT, was born out of the Vietnam era. Americans want to know why we're going to war, what the end state is, and they can get on board in general if that's clearly articulated. That's not the case with Iran. The Israelis are different. I think a lot of times, again, because a lot of them speak English, they culturally feel the same, but the Israelis have a much different tolerance for how and why they're going to war and for their endurance for war. The Israelis are completely fine with Iran slipping into chaos. That means that the Ayatollah and the IRGC can't really threaten them anymore. Hezbollah's money might be cut off in their head. And so complete chaos in Iran, it's not necessarily a bad thing for the Israelis. For us, for global energy, Straits of Hormuz.
This is one of the most consequential insights in the whole interview. Alliances can create the illusion of shared purpose even when the desired outcomes are very different. One partner may want deterrence. Another may tolerate prolonged disorder. One may define success as stability. Another may accept chaos as strategically useful. And the danger is not only being pulled into someone else's conflict, it's gradually inheriting someone else's definition of victory. There are three takeaways that linger after this conversation ends. First, wars are often justified as responses when they are really escalations inside a chain reaction. Second, intelligence matters most when it resists panic, not when it validates it. If the facts do not support an imminent threat, that is not a footnote. That is the center of the case. Third, a nation gets into real danger when it loses the ability to distinguish its own interests from the interests of the people influencing its decisions. What makes Joe Kent's resignation powerful is not just that he left office. It's that he left while pointing to a deeper problem. A war can be explained publicly in one language, understood privately in another, and accepted socially before the contradiction is ever fully examined. And that leaves one question hanging in the air long after the interview is over. If the threat was not imminent, the objective was not clearly stated, and the consequences were widely predictable, then what exactly pushed this forward? Because maybe the most dangerous thing a country can lose is not strength. Maybe it's the habit of telling the truth before the shooting starts. If this kind of breakdown helps you think differently, you'll probably enjoy the next video too.